Just 3 tactical moves, and Zhukov crushed Hitler's army. How could a single commander, facing overwhelming odds, the full industrial might of Nazi Germany, and the bitter cold of the Eastern Front, turn near-certain defeat into total victory? It is a question that has echoed through military academies, war colleges, and history books, decades, and the answer begins not with chance, but with preparation, sacrifice, and ruthless clarity of command. The year is 1941. The date, October 2nd. Location, the vast plains west of Moscow, stretching from Vyazma to Bryansk. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union, has been underway for more than 3 months. 3 million German soldiers, over 3,500 tanks, nearly 2,000 aircraft. And now, the final blow is coming. Army Group Center, commanded by Field Marshal Fedor von Bock.
Then, as German columns advanced toward Khimki, just 15 miles from the Kremlin, disaster loomed. The Red Army was running out of men, time, and ammunition. For a brief moment it seemed nothing could stop Hitler's army. This was the crisis. Then, as German columns...
By the autumn of 1941, the Soviet Union stood on the edge of annihilation. In just 4 months, the Wehrmacht had advanced more than 1,000 miles into Soviet territory. Entire Red Army formations had vanished in massive encirclements at Minsk, Smolensk, and Kiev. More than 3 million Soviet soldiers were dead, wounded, or captured. Fear gripped the men at the front. Panic spread through the rear. Factories were dismantled and shipped east beyond the Urals. Civilians dug trenches outside Moscow with bare hands, knowing that if the capital fell, the war might be lost. At dawn, on October 14, 1941, the ground west of Moscow began to shake. German artillery opened fire along a front stretching nearly 400 miles. Shells screamed overhead. The earth erupted in fountains of mud and steel. For the Red Army soldiers huddled in shallow trenches, there was no doubt. The final German push had begun. By 700 hours, forward at dawn, on October 14, 1941, the ground west of Moscow began to shake. German artillery opened fire along a front stretching nearly 400 miles. Shells screamed overhead. The earth erupted in fountains of mud and steel. For the Red Army soldiers huddled in shallow trenches, there was no doubt. The final German push had begun. By 700 hours, forward Soviet observation posts reported massive armored columns moving east.
Army Group Center unleashed its spearhead. 3rd Panzer Group under General Hermann Hoth struck from the north. 4th Panzer Group, commanded by Erich Höppner, advanced from the south. Between them lay the shattered remains of Soviet defenses near Vyazma. German Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks rolled forward in tight formations, supported by motorized infantry and Stuka dive bombers howling down from the clouds. The Soviet lines buckled almost immediately. Entire rifle divisions were surrounded within hours. Communications collapsed. Field telephones went silent as wires were cut by shellfire. By 1400 hours, German units had encircled 4 Soviet armies, more than 600,000 men trapped in what would become known as the Vyazma Pocket. For the men inside, the situation was hopeless.
Zhukov watched the reports arrive at his headquarters near Mozhaisk. Maps were marked with red arrows, driving relentlessly east. Any other commander might have ordered a full retreat. Zhukov did not. He understood that time, not territory, was now the decisive factor. Every hour the Germans were delayed meant reinforcements could arrive. Every mile they advanced cost them fuel, men, and momentum. Zhukov issued orders with cold precision. Rear guard units were told to hold at all costs. Engineers destroyed bridges and mined roads. Artillery was repositioned to fire point-blank at advancing armor. Against overwhelming force, Soviet soldiers fought delaying actions, sometimes holding positions for just minutes, sometimes for hours. But every stand mattered. By nightfall, snow began to fall. German tanks stalled in the mud and slush. Engines overheated. Tracks snapped. The men of the Wehrmacht had expected victory. Instead, they found exhaustion and resistance. And as darkness, Zhukov watched the reports arrive at his headquarters near Mozhaisk. Maps were marked with red arrows, driving relentlessly east. Any other commander might have ordered a full retreat. Zhukov did not. He understood that time, not territory, was now the decisive factor. Every hour the Germans were delayed meant reinforcements could arrive. Every mile they advanced cost them fuel, men, and momentum. Zhukov issued orders with cold precision. Rear guard units were told to hold at all costs. Engineers destroyed bridges and mined roads. Artillery was repositioned to fire point-blank at advancing armor. Against overwhelming force, Soviet soldiers fought delaying actions, sometimes holding positions for just minutes, sometimes for hours. But every stand mattered. By nightfall, snow began to fall. German tanks stalled in the mud and slush. Engines overheated. Tracks snapped. The men of the Wehrmacht had expected victory. Instead, they found exhaustion and resistance. And as darkness, German commanders sensed victory. By October 18th, forward elements of the 4th Panzer Group stood less than 70 miles from Moscow. Reconnaissance units reported seeing the glow of the capital on the horizon at night. Hitler ordered the offensive to continue without pause. "The enemy is finished," he declared. But the reality at the front was far more complex. The Soviet Mohaisky defense line, the last major barrier before Moscow, was incomplete and thinly held. Zhukov had barely 90,000 men to defend a front that required twice that number. German tanks smashed through weak points. Villages changed hands multiple times in a single day. By 1400 hours, Soviet commanders began reporting ammunition shortages and units reduced to company strength. Inside Moscow, panic spread. Government ministries prepared evacuation plans. Archives were burned. Factories worked around the clock as anti-tank obstacles were built in city streets. Civilians, including women and children, dug. The last days of October 1941 brought the Red Army to the brink of collapse. German advance units reached the outskirts of Khimki, the closest point any Wehrmacht force would come to Moscow during the entire war. Some officers claimed they could see the spires of the city through binoculars. For the men in the trenches, the truth was brutal. They were outnumbered, outgunned, exhausted, beyond measure. Then, as German columns advanced toward Khimki, just 15 miles from the Kremlin, disaster loomed. The Red Army was running out of men, time, and ammunition. For a brief moment it seemed nothing could stop Hitler's army. This was the crisis. Temperatures plunged below freezing at night. By day, sleet and snow turned roads into impassable swamps. German tanks stalled. Fuel shortages worsened. But still, the pressure did not stop. Soviet riflemen, many armed with Mosin-Nagant rifles, waited until enemy armor was just 200 yards away before opening fire, hoping to slow the advance, even for minutes. Every delay was paid for in blood. Reports flooded Zhukov's headquarters. Enemy breakthrough imminent. Ammunition nearly exhausted. Request permission to withdraw. Zhukov denied most of them, not out of cruelty, but necessity. A retreat now would mean chaos, and chaos would mean Moscow lost. The weight of command decisions pressed heavily on him. Entire Soviet battalions were wiped out holding isolated villages. Machine gun crews fought until barrels overheated. Anti-tank gunners waited until German armor loomed directly over their positions. Fear was everywhere, yet so was resolve. These men knew what awaited their families if the city fell. By early November, it appeared inevitable. German forces prepared one final push. Soviet reserves were nearly gone. Many believed Moscow would fall within days. But at that very moment, when defeat seemed certain, Zhukov prepared to make the decisions that would change the course of the war. What followed would become one of the greatest tactical reversals in military history. As German forces gathered for their final assault on Moscow, Zhukov acted. He knew he could not defeat the Wehrmacht by matching its speed or firepower head-on. Instead, he would break its momentum. What followed were 3 calculated tactical moves, simple in concept, devastating in execution. Little did the German High Command know, the initiative was about to slip from their grasp. Zhukov abandoned the idea of a single defensive line. Instead, he ordered a layered defense, stretching German supply lines thinner with every mile. Forward units were instructed not to hold ground at all costs, but to delay, withdraw, and strike again. Anti-tank guns were hidden in forests. Infantry waited silently in villages reduced to rubble. German tanks advanced, only to be hit from multiple angles. Each engagement cost the Wehrmacht fuel, ammunition, and time. Zhukov's second move was his boldest. Intelligence from Soviet spy Richard Sorg confirmed that Japan would not attack Siberia in 1941. This allowed Zhukov to redeploy fresh, battle-hardened divisions from the Far East. These troops were trained for winter warfare. They wore white camouflage. They were fully equipped. By late November, more than 300,000 Siberian troops quietly took positions outside Moscow. The Germans never saw them coming. On December 5, 1941, with temperatures dropping to -30 degrees Celsius, Zhukov struck. Soviet artillery thundered across the front. Fresh divisions surged forward, hitting exhausted German units unprepared for winter combat. German soldiers froze in summer uniforms. Weapons jammed. Engines failed. For the first time in the war, the Wehrmacht was forced into a large-scale retreat. Zhukov pressed the attack relentlessly. The Germans fell back 100 to 250 miles from Moscow. Entire divisions were shattered. The myth of German invincibility, carefully crafted since 1939, was destroyed in the snow outside the Soviet capital. Against impossible odds, Zhukov had done the unthinkable. He had turned the tide. By mid-December 1941, the Wehrmacht had been driven from the outskirts of Moscow. For the first time since June, German forces were in full retreat. Snow and cold became allies of the Soviet defenders. Tanks bogged down. Infantry froze in foxholes. Soviet troops pressed the counteroffensive with grim determination. Villages were retaken, roads cleared, and artillery positions reclaimed. The cost was staggering. Estimates suggest that during the Battle of Moscow, the Soviets suffered over 1 million casualties, dead, wounded, or missing. The Germans lost more than 400,000 men, many frozen or immobilized in the winter mud. Entire panzer divisions were rendered combat ineffective. The myth of Blitzkrieg had faltered against the harsh Russian winter and Zhukov's meticulous planning. Zhukov's leadership earned him immediate recognition. He became the first commander to halt the seemingly unstoppable German advance in open battle. Stalin personally awarded him the title Marshal of the Soviet Union, cementing his role as a national hero. But Zhukov remained focused. Victory was not the end, only the first step in the long war ahead. The psychological impact was equally profound. Moscow was safe for now. Soviet morale soared. German commanders, previously arrogant and confident, now faced the reality of extended supply lines, harsh winter conditions, and a resolute enemy. Zhukov had changed the perception of the Red Army, not merely as a defensive force, but as one capable of bold, decisive action. In the months that followed, Zhukov would continue to shape the Eastern Front. His tactics at Moscow became case studies in military academies worldwide. Defense in depth, strategic reserves, counteroffensive timing. The triumph at Moscow was not just a military victory, it was a symbol of human resilience and strategic genius. The victory at Moscow solidified Georgy Zhukov as one of the greatest military minds of the Second World War. His three tactical moves, defense in depth, deployment of Siberian reserves, and a well-timed counteroffensive, became legendary examples of leadership under extreme pressure. Medals, honors, and national acclaim followed. But Zhukov's true legacy was measured in the lives saved and the turning of the tide against the seemingly unstoppable Wehrmacht. For the soldiers who endured freezing nights, relentless artillery, and the fear of annihilation, Zhukov's decisions were more than strategy. They were hope. Every village retaken, every kilometer of territory secured, proved that meticulous planning, courage, and sheer determination could overcome impossible odds. The Battle of Moscow was not just a military victory, it was a statement. The Red Army would not break. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to WWII Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.